was a learning experience for me.
Right.
I think it's important to start with, exactly kind of what I went through and how I started to transition out of it. And so when I got cut, right, I think, if you lack of a better term, was sitting in pity. And every day I just stopped taking care of myself. I wasn't training. I wasn't eating right. I wasn't sleeping properly. I was filling myself in negative things, watching negative sports talk shows, listening to negative music, and just really sitting in this cesspool of negativity and pity. And it got to a point where literally, like, I remember looking at myself and being like, I can't do this every day. I can't be this person who sits in this filth of nothingness. And so for me, I had to, one, understand what I was going through, and then two, I had to find ways to make actionable changes to become someone who I at least wish to be. So it started with me talking with former teammates, current athletes, former athletes, coaches, trainers, and just being like, what is it like if you experience this? And clearly I found out I was not the only person who's gone through this. It's becoming much more prevalent, particularly, I think basketball players do a great job of talking about it. I think JJ Redick has been extremely vocal about the transition out of athletics. And you learn it comes back to that identity piece. And so for me, I had to learn and kind of create who I was and understand who I was. So that first comes back to understanding, well, why did I even love football in the first place? And why do we love sports? And we have to be honest. We have to recognize there is ego involved. There's not an athlete in this world that doesn't love sports because of ego reasons. Perks, fame, recognition, right? Even on a small scale, right? And that's part of it. And that's okay. And you have to be willing to admit that. Because then once you can admit that, then you can learn how to eliminate that piece. Okay, well, I don't need external validation anymore. Or at least I can, pick and choose who I get external validation from, whether it's my wife, or whether it's my parents, or whether it's, someone who I care about and trust. That's a brother figure, or whatever you want to call it. So really narrowing the circle of external validation you're willing to take some from, and make sure that they don't care whether I'm an athlete or not. Okay. And then number two is understanding, well, why did I love football in the first place? Why do I love sports outside of ego? And for me, I recognized that I love a physical, mental, and emotional challenge. I love the adrenaline rush. I love putting myself in situations where I have to fight out of it, where I am challenged and I have to work through it. So then it's, okay, now how can I do this on a daily basis? And how can I apply this to a larger picture of life? And so I looked at my relationships, I looked at my faith, and then I looked at, business and career. And how can I apply that in each one of those levels, right? And so then it comes down to making choices. And then I'm choosing, okay, every single day to get my physical challenge, I'm going to work out. And do I miss that sometimes? Yeah, absolutely. But I've become someone who loves a physical challenge. So it's much easier for me on the days I don't want to wake up and go to the gym, because that's part of who I am. I love that physical challenge. And that's the emotional challenge, right? And what does that mean? And so for me, I love putting myself in a situation where I have to control my emotions. And I think anyone who has kids can understand that's every single day. But before I had kids, right, it's understanding how to communicate. She was my fiance at the time, learning how to communicate with her, learning how to communicate with my family, learning how to set up, what I call standards. Some people call them boundaries. I call them standards. And I say, this is the standard of what it's like to get my energy, to get my emotions directed towards you. If you don't meet this, then I'm sorry. It's nothing personal. It's just you're not serving a purpose in my life anymore. Right. And then spiritually, I have to learn why I believe what I believe and become deeper involved in that faith. And so for me, it doesn't fit everybody, but I'm, a devout Catholic. And so I go to church every Sunday and I try and live out every single day what it means to be a Catholic, treating people right, praying, spending time like with my family in prayer. So it's a combination of things, but first it starts with understanding, and then two, being willing to put together that action plan and kind of how you want to define it, and really understanding like how deep do you
100%. And there's a lot of wisdom right there. And so I think really hitting on the two most important points that you touched on and you just wrapped up on for coaches to really help their athletes use their identity in a positive way is to get them to understand kind of some of those motives. And so, with that, I'm just kind of thinking about myself because I have two kind of hats I really wear that I work with coaches and with parents. So I'm a high school coach, and I also have my own kind of business where it's a basketball training business, but it's more importantly holistic development. And I feel like identity development is so important. So for a coach like myself, and I'm sure there's many other coaches that are listening as well, what's the first step that we can help guide our athletes to understand? Because I feel like when I ask questions, a lot of time I just like basketball, right? I just play it because my friends play it. But you gave a great answer where it's like you love the physical, emotional challenge. I'm sure you love the competitive aspect of having a score at the end.
Yeah, so it's tough, right? And there's a phrase I've frequently been hearing, and it's one I've begun to really adopt: is meeting athletes where they're at. And so, what does that actually mean? And some of meeting someone where they're at is maybe understanding you're not the one who can connect with them, and that's tough as a coach because you want to connect and you want to lead all your players. But when you realize and look back and reflect as a coach too, you have so many different levers you can pull, so many different people, right? So like for me, I know my spiritual lens isn't going to connect with every athlete. So I can't use that as a leading goalpost in how I coach athletes. But if I have an athlete who's very spiritual in their beliefs and it's differing from mine, we find that common ground. And then maybe I pull a lever of someone who I know has that same religious background who can help that person who's struggling with that in that moment. Right. And so for kids, 100%, it's like, why do you like basketball? It's like, well, I just like it. Right. Then it becomes, well, asking more targeted questions and learning more of that interview tactic. Like, hey, on a podcast, well, it's just asking the same questions out of curiosity for the kid. Well, it's like, well, maybe you like it because you like that one-on-one element, or maybe you like it because you get this feeling in your belly and you get real intense, and it's the only time you feel strong, right? It's when you feel strongest. And just kind of learning to poke and pry and see what kind of answers you can get. Some athletes are very simple, right? They just are. They don't think deeper. They don't have that, deeper reasoning, and that's okay. It's just understanding that and then finding the levers to kind of pull the best performance out of them, finding what motivates them. Ask them, when do you have the most fun? When are you most driven? When are you most angry? Like, when do you want to hit something?